Two armies clash on a fog-shrouded battlefield, heralded by the sound of trumpets and drums on one side, and by an eerie, chirping whistle, like countless thousands of wailing crickets on the other. A raven, its ebon feathers spattered with blood, alights on one of the fallen corpses and gently wraps its beak on the soldier's helmet. The raven looks up, curious, and flies into the sky. A land embroiled in war expands beneath it, and yet, within the shroud of conflict, the raven sees twinkling pockets of light. The raven sees souls that shine bright with courage, kindness, and determination. It sees souls lustrous with greed, fear, and anger. And most of all, it sees souls radiating with a desire to discover their place in the world. The raven sees Wildemount. The world of Exandria was one of tumultuous and chaotic forces, naught but raging fires and churning, jagged rock. Through the ashen skies of the creation primordial, the gods came from beyond the ether, new and formless. They saw the potential in the land and strove to realize it by creating the first children, the elves, to walk the verdant green and hear the music of the blue. Next, they wrought dwarves, hardy people intent on taming the land, filled with craft and invention of the divinity beyond the ashen void. A third people given life for humans, endowed with passionate hearts, with a need to laugh and celebrate. Other creations followed, and the children of creation walked the land and attempted to build on it. The land was fierce and treacherous, and sorrow filled the hearts of the gods as these first races struggled against the land. The gods imparted their creation with gifts, the first divine magics. Peoples learned to bend the angry earth to their will, to temper the flames that burst through the ground, tame the floods, and turn seed into fruit and beast into meal. Language and culture were born, and governance replaced anarchy. The creators saw progress, yet knew it was fragile and needed guidance. They created the first protectors, the dragons metallic of Exandria, to safeguard gentler races. The land still rebelled, and beneath the elements lived unknown ancient beings that had already claimed this world as their own, the primordials. These elemental titans rose from their dwelling deep in the world, intent on sundering the land once more. The gods watched in terror as their children were dashed against rocks or fed to formless terrors unleashed by the destruction. Demonic entities spilled from the abyss to feast on the carnage. Some gods wished to leave the world and tried to convince their kindred to join with the primordials, allowing chaos to reclaim the realm. Other gods wished to fight the primordials, to once again tame the land for their children. The creators that remained were forced to take up arms. They organized their followers and taught them how to draw from the powers of creation on their own, to build, change, and to destroy, all without the aid of divine power, rather using practices such as alchemy or by bending the very fabric of existence. This gift was the knowledge of arcane magic. The children used their new skills to drive away the turned creators to prison planes and destroy the primordials, scattering them to their own planes of existence. The world was at peace, and civilization bloomed in Vasselheim, the Dawn City. Over time, people grew arrogant, seeing their gifts as proof that the gods were integral to their fate. They believed they could become as powerful as the gods and began to shun faith. This hurt and surprised the creators, though they understood the willfulness and endured out of love. Great kingdoms were built, facilitated by magic. The children continued to hone arcana, soon unlocking the secrets of life itself, birthing wondrous, dangerous new creatures and powers. Archmages such as Vecna, the Whispered One, and Hallis Ludogran began to carve their paths in history. Prosperity was soon tainted by greed as petty squabbles erupted over resources and wealth. Rumors of immortality through Arcanum drove great mages wild with lust for power. One mage, her name lost to history, challenged the god of death, felling him and taking his place. Vespin Chlorus saw this and sought the guidance and power of the banished creators, opening the prisons and releasing the betrayers back into the world. While in prison, their realms were twisted into images of hatred and despair, spawning unthinkable horrors. The nine hells in the abyss began to push into creation through the gates opened by Vespin. The betrayers now desired to dominate rather than ruin, making Vespin their first thrall. They created a new kingdom on the plains of Zorhas, at the far end of the world from Vasselheim, Gor-Dranas. Corruption spread in this land, warping the minds of mortals, offering promises and boons to turn the hearts of those looking for power in the arcane. With a legion of damned behind them, the betrayer gods assaulted Vasselheim. Most of the city was reduced to rubble, though it endured the assault, saved by the prime deities, returned to fend off the betrayers. For 20 days and nights they clashed, until the dark forces were driven to retreat. Evil was beaten for now, but an arcane arms race began. Leery of the prime deities, the mortals trusted none but themselves and reforged instruments of celebration into instruments of power, artifacts that could be wielded by worthy heroes. The dwarves isolated deeper into their mountains, using divine gifts to animate legions of golems for protection. Elves used their understanding of creation's beauty to weave spells of never-before-seen destructive force. The betrayers were driven to retreat, but not wiped out. The prime deities returned once more to battle them across Exandria, with Wynandir particularly suffering the full destructive power of the gods. The ruling houses of Wynandir were drawn into either side or abstained. The powers wielded scarred the landscape for eons, and the irresponsible use of the arcane by mortals ensured their legacy's ruin. Little record remains of this conflict, but the effects are still felt today. The boundaries holding back elemental chaos were frayed, spilling nastiness onto the world. The kingdom of Gor-Dranas was reduced to ash, as the ley lines of magic across Exandria were rearranged. The conflict razed entire cities and inspired many to flee from this plane of existence. It is believed that only a third of the population survived, leaving only Vasselheim. The betrayers were once again banished, but the threat of their return weighed heavily on the world. The prime deities blamed themselves for the cataclysmic damage and knew that while divine gateways were left open, the banished betrayers' prison was imperfect and temporary. To ward off the threat, the creators returned to the realms whence they had come, dragging the betrayer and abomination with them, and sealing the divine gates behind them. They would never again be able to visit their creations. This event is known by many names: the Second Spark, the Penance, and the Divergence. In the wake of the prime deity's sacrifice, the world was reborn once again. The gods still guided the children from the other side of the gates, while buried ruins and ancient relics faded in the light of new hopes and destinies. In the west of Wildemount lies the Menagerie Coast, a tropical seaside paradise home to the Clovis Concord. The Concord is a political entity composed of cooperative city-states headed by Maquis, with an economy based on agriculture and sea trade. The lands are home to a cosmopolitan, diverse people that are separated from the heartlands by the Sirius Mountains. They are cordial with the Dwendalian Empire to the northeast. The heartland of Wildemount is Wynandir, which is home to the Dwendalian Empire and Kryn dynasty. The two powers, enclosed by mountains and built on the ruins of the Calamity, are perched on the edge of open war. The empire, headed by King Bertrand Dwendal, was formed when his ancestor, King Manfred, unified the ruling houses of western Wynandir and absorbed the Julos dominion. A cabal of mages known as the Cerberus Assembly serves the king, penance for a battle that leveled 2 wards of the city and killed hundreds of the citizens nearly 300 years prior. The empire is restrictive on matters of religion, with Erithus, Bahamut, Moradin, Pelor, Ayun, and the Raven Queen being the only approved deities, though the conflict with the Kryn is being used by more progressive forces within to quietly relax the oppression. From the capital, Rexentrum, the Crown and the Cerberus Assembly spread propaganda through the land, using rumors about kidnapped children and Kryn cannibalism to unite the Empire's people. The Kryn dynasty, ruled by the bright queen Leylas Kryn, is the foe of the Empire and ruler of the northern waste of Zorhas and eastern Wynandir. They have only recently revealed themselves to the wider world, governing formerly nomadic waste folk from the ruins of Gor-Dranas. The Kryn largely composed of the Drow, turned from Lolthan, escaping their enslavement to the Betrayer gods. It is rumored that the Kryn are desperately seeking a particular set of artifacts related to their new god. To the south of Xhorhas lies the ruins of the Dragonborn nation of Draconia. Their capital was a floating chain of islands where the ruling houses looked down on the tailless Dragonborn slaves toiling in the ravine below them. The Chroma Conclave, a union of ancient dragons, destroyed the city, and the slaves rose up against their former masters. The vacuum of power after the uprising led many would-be rulers to cause the streets of the new capital, Zarzath Kittrel, to run red with blood. Many refugees of the conflict were relocated to Talonstadt, precariously straddling the Empire's eastern border and making a strategic land grab by the Kryn. To the east of Wynandir, separated from Xhorhas by the Ashkeeper Peaks, is the Miskath Strand, also known as Blightshore. It is well known to be a terrible place, home to mutated abominations and other cruel forces. While the lands impacted by the calamity were rebuilt, Blightshore is still smoldering after being savagely reshaped. As a result, it is largely unmapped and unknown. Adventurers and travelers should beware these lands, as they are extremely dangerous, with very little known rewards for braving the wastes. Frigid waste in the north of the continent, the graying wildlands are home to Isilcross, the ruins of an ancient culture rumored to have flying cities and powerful magics. The prospect of weaponizable artifacts have attracted seekers from the Empire and the Kryn, though the land's wild magic, inhospitable terrain, and monstrous inhabitants are a threat to any fortune seekers. The city known as Shady Creek Run in the Wildlands is run by criminal families, known as the Tribes. The Wildland is also home to Palebank Village, a fishing outpost home to several hundred dwarves and elves, and a mystery. The sun is low in the sky, sinking behind the fresh grave of Ergun Winth, an old dwarf turned to an ice statue by a curse or disease.